Okay, so I'm going to stick up my my presentation. So if I do share screen, that one there, can you see that clearly? Yeah.
Yep, that's perfect.
Jolly good. So this is going to be today's syllabus, I suppose. I've when I normally run this, I normally run it either at somebody's studio there or their facility, or I've actually run it at Eizo as well in Ascot, because
Right.
they have a nice big training room, and because I've got a great relationship with them. They're happy for me to use a training room there. But the point is that when we do that day, it's a much longer day. We go all the
Yep.
way to 5:30, but we also cover some HDR stuff, which I think by necessity is going to be out of the scope of today, because I can't really. Well, for a start, I haven't got a mastering monitor here.
Yep.
I've got an HDR telly that I could show, but the problem is that you really have to kind of see it, and part of it as well is being able to see what it looks like on waveform monitors. And I've got an HDR waveform monitor here, but I think without that kind of show and tell element, I don't think it translates well over Zoom. So today is going to be about Rec 709, HD television calibration. We'll talk about P3, the film standard, and we'll talk about Rec 2020 wide color gamut for UHD television and Netflix. But all our calibration efforts today are going to be around Rec 709 for broadcast television, as it is at the moment. And in truth, of all the calibrating I do, all the places I go, that is the vast majority of the work I do. 95% of the work I do is the nature of light. And so what you can see there at the top of the slide is the electromagnetic spectrum. And so the electromagnetic spectrum runs all the way from gamma rays up through X-rays, through ultraviolet light, through visible light, which is a very little slither in the middle of the spectrum, through infrared light, microwaves, radio waves, to long radio waves, and basically what you see there are all the electromagnetic waves that arrive from the sun. If you point any kind of electromagnetic detector at the sun, be it a radio receiver or your eyes or an X-ray detector or a gamma ray detector, all of this stuff is constantly streaming from the sun all the time. And it just so happens that a very tiny slither of this spectrum, between about 380 and 720 nanometers, when that hits the retinas in the back of your eyeball, it excites sensitive cells in the back of your eyes, and you perceive it as color. There's nothing particularly special about 380 to 720 nanometers that differentiates it really from any of the other electromagnetic waves, other than your retina perceives it, and you get a sensation of color. And if sort of down there at 400 nanometers, if those wavelengths are striking your retina, the sensation your brain presents to your consciousness is of very deep sort of violety blue light. And as the wavelength increases, the perception you get, the feeling you get to your conscious is of a changing color, up through sort of 500, 550 is a very sort of saturated green, the color of chlorophyll, so the color of leaves and that kind of thing, up through the yellows and all the way to 700 nanometers, where you're perceiving reds. That's all that color really is. It's your perception of those changing wavelengths. As I say, it's a very small segment in the middle of a very big electromagnetic spectrum. But it's just the way you are, just the way God made your eyes, and that's it. Now we are sensitive to 3 colors: red, green, and blue. I mean, that's a bit of an oversimplification, and color scientists don't refer to them as red, green, and blue. They refer to them as short, medium, and long wavelength sensitivities. But if you look at that graph there, you can see you've got one set of cells in the back of your retina. They're called the cones, cone for color, the color sensitive cells. One set of cells is very sensitive around 450 nanometers, and that's the color we perceive as being a very deep blue, very saturated blue. And then there's another set of cells that are very sensitive around 550 nanometers, which is the color of chlorophyll in plants, the color of leaves essentially. And then there's another set of sensitive cells that are very sensitive around the 600 nanometer range, very, very sort of saturated red. And so it's a good way of thinking about them as the blue, the green, and the red cones. And if the blue cones are largely being stimulated, you will perceive that as a very blue color. If the green cones are largely being stimulated, you'll perceive that as very green, and the red cones for red. And then if reds and greens are being equally stimulated, you'll perceive that as yellow. You can't actually see yellow because you don't have any yellow cones. You don't have any yellow cones that are sensitive around 575 nanometers, where yellow sits in the spectrum. But your brain does this amazing job of saying, oh, 575 nanometers, and we're getting both the red and the green cones are firing, therefore that's yellow. I will present to Matt's consciousness a feeling of yellow.
Okay.
You don't get a feeling of reddy green. You don't say, oh, that's a very reddy green daffodil I'm looking at. You see an entirely different color, don't you? You are aware of a different color called yellow. But as far as your eyes are concerned, they've just seen a mix of red and green. Similar, there's no color at black. But as you go from black all the way up to the brightest, most saturated colors, our object gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what we're looking at here is one end of a three-dimensional object. And so we can say we've gone from red, green, and blue, but that's just colloquial. That's lazy sort of engineer talk. We've gone from red, green, and blue through a set of mathematical transforms to little x, little y, which gives us a position on a 2D surface. And then there's another parameter called big Y, which is how far into the 3D object we are. And we commonly refer to that big Y in television. We call it luminance. It's how illuminated, it's how kind of strong the color is at that point. And of course, if we look at the center of this diagram, the mix of red, green, and blue, we can see a white point. If you remember, our perception is that if there's equal amounts of red, green, and blue light, we perceive that as white. So our white point is right in the middle, in the mix of red, green, and blue. And that white point goes all the way through the middle of this 3D object, all the way to a black point, which we can't see because it's being obscured because we're looking at one end of the 3D object. And at the corners of the guitar plectrum, or the horseshoe, or whatever this object is, we've got the very saturated, the most saturated, the most colourful versions of red, green, and blue. And so this is the diagram that's used for everybody who's doing sort of color research. The people who are making paint, the people who are making fabrics, the people who are designing televisions or computer monitors or projectors or television cameras. They all refer to this model. This is the sort of the universal model. CIE 1931 chromaticity chart is how we all talk about color. And so if you're kind of going to get into the whole kind of calibration thing, you kind of have to be comfortable about referring to colors in their little x, little y coordinates, and then big Y being the luminance. So here's some more examples of metamerism. So what's going on here is I built a little enclosure. When I do this in real life for people, I have this little enclosure, and it's a little wooden box. So the right hand side of the slide, you can see it's there. It's a little enclosure, a little wooden box. The insides are painted in a neutral white paint, and one side of the box. And the two sides of the box are separated by a little wooden divider, and there's no light leakage between the two sides of the box. One side of the box has a fluorescent lamp in it, a white fluorescent lamp. The other side of the box has one of those RGB mixer bulbs, where you can use a little app on your phone, a little Bluetooth app, and you can mix the red, green, and blues to get whatever color light you want. And so what I do is I set this thing up and I give the students access to the app, and I say, right, mix the left-hand side lamp so that it matches the right-hand side. And they have at it, and they get a good mix. And generally speaking, they can mix the red, green, and blues so that there is perceivably no difference between the light. The white in one side looks exactly the same as the white in the other side, and they feel very proud of themselves. And then I throw a couple of those juggling thuds into the two cavities, and all of a sudden, for what they thought was the same white light, they're now completely different colors. I mean, they're perceivably different.
Right.
And then I say, right, take out your phones and take a photograph of this. And, across different models of phones, they get entirely different results. And it's really a very good way of hammering home to people what metamerism looks like in real life. Even though you thought you had a good mix of white that matched the broadband white. And so I have a little spectroscope, which is a little like homebrewed thing. So on the left-hand side of the slide here, the top two images are the spectrum of the fluorescent light. And you see there's a decent amount of red, green, and blue light in there. And then the bottom two images are the spectrum of the RGB mixer bulb. And those two spectrums, when you look at the light, that looks like the same white light to people. You know, that's the same, it's exactly the same white color. But when you start putting objects in that white light to see how the colors are reproduced, you know, you're in for a nasty shock, because the fluorescent light is much better at faithfully rendering color than the RGB mixer bulb is.
Right.
And so this is sometimes referred to as the CRI, the color rendering index. And generally speaking, LEDs, although they're great in many respects, they're efficient, they don't run hot, they last, you know, tens of thousands of hours compared to the 1,000 hours of an incandescent bulb. Their color rendering index, their CRI, is not as good, and so you know, that's one of the limitations of LEDs. And so here's a screen grab. Here's that situation. So the left-hand column is taken on my Fuji. It's like a little bridge camera. The middle one is taken on an Android tablet, and the right-hand one is taken on an iPhone 8. And you can see. So we've talked a lot about RGB. You know, that's how your eyes work, and it's how cameras work, and it's how monitors work and projectors work. Anything that we, you know, telecine machine, you know, old school telecine machine or slide scanner or whatever, they all work in RGB. You know, they acquire a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, and then when mixed together correctly in accordance with what the standard calls for, so Rec 709 has a mathematical relationship between red, green, and blue, and the color image, you know, it all works. And so in a television camera, it's done using this piece of optical engineering called the dichroic block. So the dichroic block is actually 3 prisms that are glued together very precisely, and the coloured light that enters the dichroic block essentially gets split up into its red, green, and blue components, and then you stick a CCD on each of the faces of the dichroic block, and then you have a CCD that's sensing the red image, the green image, and the blue image. And so if we look at the bottom left of that slide, the young woman in the red blouse, that's the colour image that's coming in through the lens of the camera. And then we've got the 3 sub-images that are coming out of the back of the dichroic block. So of course the red image, you know, her blouse, her shirt is very bright because it was a red shirt, and her face is very bright because the pink of human or at least Caucasian faces is predominantly, there's a lot of red in it because it's pink. And then you look at the green image, and her blouse is almost black because there's no green in her blouse, but the foliage around the back of her head is very bright and very obvious. And then you look at the blue image, and it's really only her face that's standing out because there's a lot of white in her face, and so white is red, green, and blue mixed. But the green foliage behind her is almost black. Her blouse is almost black, and so we've split that real color image with all the wavelengths that came in through the camera lens. We've split that up into 3 channels: a red, green, and a blue channel. And so long as we maintain all those red, green, and blue channels all the way through to the end of the process, the consumer's television, you know, and their set-top box in their living room, and we then recombine those red, green, and blue images successfully to give something that looks a bit like the color image that went in through the camera lens in the first place, then we have a workable color system. We have something that can look at color pictures, carry them all the way through electronically, through the production chain, the post-production chain, to transmission, encoding, you know, over the satellite, over the, you know, DVB, T, Crystal Palace, antenna, roof, whatever, you know, DVD, Blu-ray player, however it gets to your telly, and then when it hits the display panel in the back of your telly, so long as we've maintained with some degree of fidelity the red, green, and blue components, you'll see a color image that looks exactly like what you remembered when you were standing on the film set or the TV set and you looked at the young woman in the red blouse. And in fact, if you've ever got a magnifying glass, it was a lot easier in standard definition days. If you've ever got a magnifying glass and looked closely at the front of a television screen, you can see the little red, green, and blue subpixels.
Yeah.
you know, and you can see how they get excited. You know, if it's predominantly the little red subpixels that are being excited, then you see a red color. If all three of them are being excited, you see something closer to white. So the thing about color bars is a remarkably useful test signal, because as we've discussed previously, they go from white all the way through to black. Or in fact, black's missing on SMPTE color bars. It's down here. That's where black is.
But kind of in a way, like an inverse Macbeth chart. You know what the color should be, so you can grade the monitor so they become that.
They are, yeah. Now, what you may not notice is down here, we've got three little stripes. So this whole block here is black. It's 0 volts if we're talking about analog video terms, but it's it's black. And there are two little stripes down here. One of which is slightly grayer than black. One of which is slightly blacker than black. And so the first thing you do with any monitor is you set the overall black level, and you do that by making sure you can only just see this guy and you can't see this guy. Now, I appreciate that we're in a situation here where we're a couple of layers abstracted.
Yeah, I'm taking your word for it here because I really can't see the lines.
So the first thing I do with these little monitors is I set all these controls. I set them all to their midpoint, and they have a little detent position. There's a little notch in the middle, where they're at their 0 value. So before I start doing any adjustments, I zero those out so that the monitor is in a kind of a known state. And if people want to fiddle about on the front panel controls, knowing full well that we calibrated it with the front panel controls at their notched detent position. And so that means that when you make all your adjustments in the engineering menus, in here, can you see that? Yeah.
Yep.
You're adjusting it with the knobs in a known good position. So if I go to picture sub adjust, I've got a few things I can adjust. I can adjust the contrast, the brightness, and the chroma. So, rather bizarrely, monitor manufacturers a long time ago chose to use the word brightness to mean black level. Brightness means how sat up or how sat down or how intense the black parts of the picture are. Why they couldn't have chosen a better word, I don't know, because for most people, brightness means how bright something is.
Yeah.
So here we go. If I start making adjustments to this, and if I zoom that to there, so if I start adjusting that up, can you see that guy starting to become visible? Yeah. Now, to my eyes, that guy is now very.
It's quite thick. It's probably about a centimeter thick. Is that right?
Yeah, thick as your finger. Yeah. So when I'm setting up this monitor, I basically want to just be able to see that. So there we go. That's about there on me looking at the monitor directly. So what we're looking at now is color bars, but just the blue channel of color bars. Let's go back to just full, all three red, green, and blue present at once. And you'll notice here we've got a blue bar here and a white bar here. Now, all the blue that's come via this part of the picture has come via the luminance channel, and all the blue that's come via this part of the picture has come via the CB, the blue color difference channel. Now, SMPTE color bars are set up such that when the saturation of the picture is correct, you can't see a split here.
Right.
So if I go, if I just take the manual saturation knob on the front of the monitor, it's called on JVC monitors it's called chroma, on Sony monitors it's called color, and on Flanders monitors it's called saturation. But it's just how intense the colors are, and I wind that right up. You can see that
the split.
The split is now very evident. And if I turn off that, I mean, it may not be obvious over this camera because I don't doubt this camera is self-adjusted. But to my eye, these pictures now look far too colourful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, the yellow is definitely a bit brighter. It was.
If I wind that back down, in fact, if I wind it the other way, so the
I can see the camera adjusting. It's very strange.
Yeah. So now I've wound it down. So to my eye, the pictures are now almost monochrome. Well, that's quite a difference actually. The pictures to my eye are now almost monochrome. They're much less saturated than they need to be. And if I go back into blue check mode, again, the split is now very, very evident.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Klein probe, it has like a rubber kind of
like a suction cup.
Yeah, which just basically seals out any external light that might be getting in there. Yeah, you put it up against that, and so that's reading the light coming off the front of the monitor. sort of like a desaturated bluey color, but it's there. It is, you know. So that's where it is on the chart. Yeah, and basically as we change the color being thrown up onto the monitor, the probe is reading back that color for us. So let's go back here and go back to a peak white signal. And you think, well, that looks splendid. The red dot is almost bang in the center. That's really very good. But what you have to appreciate is we're looking at the 10,000 foot view here. This is not
right.
You know, so if we go into the graph settings and we, rather than selecting CIE 1931, we go magnified, we go right into the middle of the, the chart, and so it's not quite as good as we thought it was. But what you so look, you can see up here, you can see the X and the Y values that we want our white point to be, 0.313 and 0.326, which is the XY values for the white point. And we can see our black body locus, you know, a little bit of that line there. And the first thing you might say to yourself is, hang on, Phil, you said that white points sit on the black body locus. How come I can clearly see a difference between the black body locus and where the probe reckons our white point should be? They're clearly not the same thing. The white point is not on the black body locus. And that's actually a bit of science history, because back in the 1970s, they realized that the value for Planck's constant, which is one of these fundamental physics constants of nature, that they got it wrong for like 50 years. And when they recalculated it using better data, that basically the trickle down to that is that our television white point is actually not 6500 Kelvin, it's 6504 Kelvin. That's why you often hear people refer to TV white as being 6504, not 6500. There's a tiny difference between a black body 6500 Kelvin white point and the white a 10 nanometer probe can't make accurate readings. And for building profiles for the Klein, for just standard dynamic range, Rec 709, those kind of profiles, it's adequate. I do have another spectro, which is called the CR250, which again is as expensive as the Klein, and I tend to use that if I'm building profiles for high dynamic range, you know, OLED, you know, what narrow color primary type applications. But you know, this is fine for today. And the reason I've hung this one off the monitor is that the Eizo software will talk to this probe. So let's go back to the desktop of that machine, and let's you can see down the side here, you can see all the preset standards that the monitor is able to do. And what you don't realize by looking at this is these are actually all LUTs. So you've got 10 LUT slots that you can load into the monitor, and the monitor, that's how you calibrate these monitors. You basically load LUTs into them. The nice thing about Eizos is that they have had the same. Eizo have not yet gone down the OLED route. Every Eizo in the world is an LED backlit monitor, and so there we go. I'm going to switch back to the output of the laptop so you can see that. So you can see it's reported back the results. So you know, these are easily within 1 delta of where they need to be. So we're happy now, you know, grading work. So what we're going to do first up is we're going to get the monitor as right as we can for Rec 709, just with the internal controls. And then we'll make a LUT to kind of just push it over the line. The thing is that you want the LUT to do as little work as possible. If the LUT's obliged to do quite big color changes, you risk it clipping the colors. So now we say, okay, well, let's profile this display and see if we can get it a bit better by making a LUT. So the bit of software we use for that is this thing called ColourSpace. Yeah. And then and because Lightspace needs to be able to generate patches to throw at the television, for us to be able to read back, we need to tell ColourSpace, that they changed the name of the product last year, and I still habitually say Lightspace, having been using a Lightspace user for 10 years. So there they all are. If you remember the Fuji IS Mini, that's the one they have at Jigsaw. There's just another selection in here. But we're using a Flanders FSI Box IO, and that's the right IP address. Yes, let's connect. Boom. Okay.
I take it the patch color indicator in the top right-hand corner is indicative of the patch currently being displayed on screen.
That's right, yeah. This is a gamma plot, and this shows us if there's any deviation between the red, green, and the blues in the midpoints of the gamma curve. So remember, that's the gamma curve of the display. If you remember that from the from that
the leaf
yeah.
Scattered diagram.
So look, here's our LUT presented as a cube, and you can see that there are parts of the cube where the monitor is clear. Clearly there's a lot of dynamic range that we're not using. If you so the Rec 709 is the outer cube, yeah.
Yep.
All the colored dots you can see inside are the ones that were measured, and the very fact that they're not in a perfect cube themselves means that they've had to be moved to get them to the right Rec 709 numbers. Now, a few of them are bashing up against the red vertices, which means we might have some red inaccuracy in the final LUT. But generally speaking, this is very nice because all the dots are well contained seemingly within this. Even those blue ones, which are getting near to the vertices, are well contained.